Module 7B, Assessment. Who likes tests? Well, no one. Unless we had enlightened teachers in college and high school and even elementary school, pop quizzes were a constant threat, often meant as punishment. The end of the unit meant a big test that we had to study for, especially if we didn't keep up with all the endless bits of information. Maybe you got a study guide, or were lucky to have a study group, but there were always unknowns, or at least that's what many students thought. Sometimes this is still the rule. In using the effective instructional sequence, we and our prepared students find we are much more able to enjoy the journey. Formative assessments inform the teacher and the students about where we are and what else we need to do. The final summative assessment is more of a fun but challenging activity or project that allows students to demonstrate what they have practiced and practiced over and over in many ways sequentially, so they feel comfortable and confident, hopefully, in their linguistic skills. Because we plan for assessments that are accurate and meaningful, we have used the effective instructional sequence from the beginning. We began with the end in mind. For purposes of learning in this online foundation class, we're saving the actual assessment design choices until the end, but in our classrooms, we will have shared with our students what the final assessment will be, because it reflects the functional objective which we also share with our students. Everyone is very aware of expectations. One of the benefits is that this helps focus student attention on concepts and activities. It also plays a big role in fairness, because students have a definite path to follow and they know where they are going. We often refer to the language learning continuum that we saw in standards to see what our students should really be able to know and do. Because of our initial functional objective, students from the beginning know what they are expected to do, and for the majority of students, those who have been engaged and have practiced, the world is a much happier place. The teacher knows and shares with the students the difference between the student not being able to demonstrate knowledge and skill due to lack of practice, and normal, expected, anticipated developmental errors and linguistic and cultural breakdown. There are a variety of reasons why some students just don't get it. It could be anything from illness or truancy or behavior stemming from life issues, or maybe they don't like the teacher and have chosen to disengage. But if we have evidence that a student does know and can do, then we will see fairly predictable errors when the student focuses on meaning. During the EIS, we will have been using formative assessments. In formative assessment, we want to see where students are and also whether or not our lesson has been adequate for our goals. Formative assessments provide students and teachers with feedback. Both teacher and students see what they can improve upon. As instructors, we use this information to guide our pedagogical decisions. In embedded assessment, the teacher observes student work, such as in a particular guided practice, using checks for understanding to get information about progress. The teacher may be looking for vocabulary growth or mechanical use of structure or related cultural understanding. To be fair, students should not receive a grade per se for an embedded assessment. Quizzes can be useful for assessing discrete items, especially because they may not have embedded meaning. We are only checking to see if students know how to identify members of a family, for instance, or know the difference between I pack and you pack. In this case, we will grade. In embedded assessments, we ask ourselves, how are my students progressing? In quizzes, we ask ourselves, how did my students progress? There is a big difference between a typical big test or end-of-unit test and a summative assessment. The end-of-unit test will separate components such as vocabulary, verb conjugation, and culture, which can even be answered in English in some cases. In a summative assessment, we evaluate how well a student has accomplished the goal set forth by the functional objective. There are many ways to analyze assessment categories. Thus far, we have seen the difference between formative and summative, and we see that both are useful and necessary. Now, we will think about assessment in a couple of other very important ways. We will specifically discuss achievement and proficiency assessments, as well as direct and indirect assessments. Keep in mind, there are many other ways to analyze our assessment choices. However, if we keep in mind this catchy phrase, evaluate what we value, we will not only save time, but we will create those great assessments everyone has been looking forward to. Okay, so let's talk about proficiency assessments versus achievement assessments. Proficiency tests are concerned with finding out if the student has acquired the knowledge and skill necessary to carry out given linguistic and culturally based tasks in the target language. They tend to be standards-based, authentic communicative tasks which may be demonstrated in many ways. In a proficiency test, students will work within a context just as they have been doing all along in the classroom. Because they are working communicatively, they are in the target language. Now, let's look at achievement tests. Achievement tests are concerned with finding out if the student can demonstrate knowledge of discrete items in the language. This could be vocabulary or a grammar point. Often, these tests are objective in nature with one right answer for each question. It is possible to ask mechanical questions with neither meaning nor communication necessary for student success. Sometimes the answers as regards culture may even be in English. For the purposes of the effective instructional sequence and for the unit being prepared for this online class, we are interested in direct assessment because it lets us know how the student is doing. It includes formative assessments along the way and the summative assessment. Direct assessment subsumes all the assessments. In general terms, direct assessment can be proficiency, achievement, or standardized because they all look at student work. Indirect assessment is something you consider with your school or department and can be useful for evaluating programs via surveys, etc. Sometimes people say direct assessment when they mean authentic assessment, but that's okay as long as all the participants have the same understanding as to the type of assessment. Although there are differences, authentic assessment is sometimes called performance assessment. They both imply the same kind of thing. And for our purposes here, we are interested in the linguistic task we are asking the students to perform based on the objective, and then a scoring rubric with the intention of making the scoring as accurate and as equitable as possible. Also, in authentic or performance assessment, the student will acquire a body of linguistic, structural, and cultural knowledge, but the student is now expected to perform a linguistic and cultural task. This is quite different from a traditional kind of objective test assessment. There, the student demonstrates only that he can choose among correct information or call up knowledge. The fourth element we aim to value is fairness. The first thing we do to ensure fairness is to make our plans and objectives known to the students who will eventually demonstrate their knowledge and skills based on that functional objective. Then we design and implement our lesson sequentially and with enough practice and feedback to give the student all the tools he or she needs. That, in a nutshell, is the effective instructional sequence. So how do we score a project or activity in which the student must demonstrate proficiency? Aren't there many variables that will make it difficult or virtually impossible to be equitable? These are fair questions. It could be argued that there is always subjectivity in scoring assessments of the kind that we are creating for this class. It could also be argued that even standardized tests with bubbled-in answers always contain a certain amount of bias in the questions themselves. So, in the next module, we'll look at some ways to create rubrics that can encourage us to be as fair and as professional as possible in assessing student work. So, as a quick review, we see how all the components are coming together to create a seamless teaching experience and a successful learning experience for our students. We have covered in modules 1 through 6 standards and how they guide our functional objective, also creating our lesson components and giving us our summative assessment. Following the EIS, our students acquire the linguistic and cultural skills to achieve the lesson's objectives. In the application and extension portion, students widen the scope of the lesson and unit. Finally, in the summative assessment, we evaluate students' proficiency. The assessment is direct and is an authentic linguistic task that aims to be fair. This is the end of Module 7b. Please proceed to Module 7c, Rubrics.